Hey everybody, welcome to Latter-day Struggles. This is your host, Valerie. Today I have with me a good friend of mine, fellow therapist, colleague, and a beginning co-host with me. He used to co-host with me all the time, and he's back to visit. Hi, Brannon. How
Hey,
are you?
Valerie. I'm good. Thanks for
Good.
having me back. I appreciate it.
It's really good to have you. It's always good to have a fun talk about some sort of a deep dive subject in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from the standpoint of two therapists, because we have to kind of walk the intersection between psychology and religion, which is not always
Yes.
an easy walk to walk, as we both know.
No, it's not. Yes.
So Brandon and I come together today, both wanting to talk a little bit about that murky water that the bishop has to walk in and what the bishop's role can be, and in our opinion, maybe should be. I know that's a word we use
Hmm.
seldom, but
Right.
sometimes bishops do better in certain roles than in others. Sometimes they do wonderful, beautiful work and help a lot of people. And in other cases, you and I know have probably done therapy to help people overcome some trauma and some wounds that have happened at the hand of willing and desiring to be helpful bishops, but their work ends up not being very helpful, and it sometimes can hurt people. Any thoughts you have right off out of the gate on that, Brannon?
Well, my first my first thought is just I could tell you some stories
Yeah.
that would be that it would blow your mind about some things that I've heard through the years of the way that bishops have handled things. The other thing I want to say before we really dive into this discussion is most bishops, I believe, are doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
And so both exist. These are men doing the best that they can, and then sometimes these are prideful men who cause harm.
Yeah.
And so I think it is important for us to talk about what role and what is important for a bishop to understand about how to truly help people.
Yes. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I believe there is an absolute bishops are not unlike everybody else, meaning that there's a
No.
cross section in the entire world of really decent people trying to do their best in whatever their
Right.
capacities are, professionally or personally, at church, at home, at school, whatever. And then there's also some ones that really struggle and get and practice a lot of unrighteous dominion and justify very bad behavior in the name of calling, priesthood, God, and they really do a lot of damage. And so it's just like everywhere else. They're all kinds of them.
But it kind of speaks to the problem,
Yeah.
Valerie, of if these are men just doing the best that they can, or if these are prideful men with unrighteous dominion,
Yeah.
either way, what's really kind of dangerous and scary is the pedestal that they get put on.
Right.
And then when people are in really vulnerable situations, they go into a man doing the best he can or a prideful man,
Yeah.
and either one can harm somebody in a really vulnerable situation, right?
Absolutely. And we've seen that firsthand. I mean, that's part of
Yes.
our practice
Right.
as people that work a lot with members of our faith tradition is that, and just to sort of circle back to the idea that you had about us putting a bishop on the pedestal, that is part of a large part, I think, of the problem. I think sometimes because there is some sort of cultural conditioning around what a bishop's responsibility is, what they're capable and competent of helping us overcome, that is probably the first order of business that we need to sort of like talk
Yeah.
about, because most of the time when there's crisis, when people are the most vulnerable, honestly, the bishop is probably not the first place to come, because 9.5 times out of 10, they don't have the skill set and the training to meet with people in any kind of a productive way when there is deep crisis.
Exactly. Yet we are taught as members of the church that my bishop is the person who receives a revelation from God to help me. And so I go to my bishop for guidance and help. And oftentimes, how do I know that guidance and help is coming from God or coming through the lens of that man
Right.
who's just like shooting from the hip?
Well, we've
Uh,
talked firsthand. I think you and I both know of, if you talk to a very earnest bishop or a past bishop, and they talk about the first time someone came in with pretty serious or complex issues, say for example in the sexual realm, 99% out of
yeah,
100 times the bishops are
that is
just,
always the thing, right?
and it's always like, I didn't even know what they were talking about, much less how to answer their questions, right?
Right.
I get a kick out of those kinds of conversations. It was, and the problem is that most of the time they've been conditioned to sort of like take a deep breath and sort of like wait for, revelation to fall upon them somehow and give them a skill set that, so it takes the rest of us, multiple years to have any kind of like even a cursory understanding of, and then they're supposed to say something. And so most of the time, I shouldn't say most, but often they move into sort of like BS mode, and they do a lot of damage, as if in some ways they feel like, well, if I really hold the priesthood and I really have this calling, then somehow I need to provide them with something. And so then there's this mutual collusion between a bishop trying to be someone with training he doesn't have, and a ward member who's needing something desperately from this person that they give a lot of credibility to. And it's a dance of destruction between these two people.
That is such a good point, Valerie. And I think that's hard to say, but the reality is bishops are faking it in many ways, because and they feel like they have to, because they have to show up as a leader and they have to show up to give the help, but they don't know what the heck they're talking about.
Do you want to re-say that, Brannon? and like, to speak into what you're just describing, it's a setup. It's a setup. It's not, and I've mentioned this many times on the podcast, I have a lot of compassion for these guys. It would be sort of the same as me. Like, what if I, for example, was called to be a high school calculus teacher, and someone said to me, listen, you're a really good person and you're kind and you believe in calculus. I mean, you believe that bridges are built with, and it's like, well, I sure do, but you don't know how to do calculus. You've never built a bridge, but I believe that if you just show up in this place, it's going to be okay. And so I'm like, okay, I'll just get there and I'll do it. And here I'm leading with the fact that I don't do math well at all. Right. I don't even help after about the third grade, I passed that right off to my husband. I know I don't know it. And so, but if I were to be set up to be in a position to share a skill set that I legitimately don't have, and I'm also led to believe that if you really trusted in God, you somehow would receive that skill set. I mean, my goodness, what a setup for failure. And the thing that I think is so challenging about this is it's putting desperate and vulnerable people in harm's way, because they're coming to that person as if they had the skill set. And I'm thinking about, like I said, sexual issues in general, marriage counseling, which you and I both know is highly complicated. Even people that go into the counseling field, I would say, maybe you can correct me if you think I'm wrong here, 80% of people that go into counseling don't do marriage counseling. It's too hard. It's too hard for even people with advanced degrees.
Yes.
Anything around addiction, I think even grief issues they're a high skill set. And certainly people that go through anything that I would call trauma. Those are not bishop variety kinds of things to be talking to your bishop about, unless the only caveat I give there is when they come in, the bishop has one job, well, two, I'm going to say two. They have the job to offer immense amounts of love, and then to outsource and be they send them where they need to go to be put in competent and capable and loving hands.
Yes. Well, it's just like your math analogy. Yeah. It's a setup for the bishop, yet it's not that hard. And what I mean is, it just requires a little bit of humility and not so much pride. For you to be able to say, wow, that sounds really hard, and I don't know how to help you, but I do know some people that possibly could. Yes. And it's that simple. All you have to do as a bishop to like really help somebody and really be there for them is admit that you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And it's simple. It's simple, but it's not easy.
Right.
I think that sort of brings us to the sort of the institutional problem of what we hand. It speaks into patriarchy. It speaks into sort of this idea of leadership and what it means to be a bishop, and the desire to advance in status and calling, and in sort of the false traditions that we talk about in terms of your expectation to have the Spirit and what it means to have the Spirit. It's all of these things prevent many good men from being able to do the most Christ-like thing, which is to say, you know what? This is so painful, and I am happy to sit here with you in the pain for a moment, or more than one, for moments, lots of moments, and just to offer you my love and be a window through which you can see God's love.
Mm-hmm.
And then also let you know that I am not going to be able to help you with this particular thing. And as a matter of fact, if I were to try, it would actually probably hurt you. And so
Yeah.
I can't do what and I think, and it's kind of an education process. It's like, I'm not a specialist in sexual issues.
Right.
It's
Right.
important. They matter. I can tell you're suffering. And so the worst thing I could do for you is to pretend like I'm an expert in this when I am
Yes.
not.
Yes. So I've worked a lot with bishops, and
Mm-hmm.
I gave a presentation once at a ward, and the stake president came up to me afterwards and said, "The only difference between me and you is people have to pay to talk to you." And that's what the stake president said to me. Yeah.
Ouch. Oh
Um,
dear. Oh
and
man.
and I've gone blows on with bishops over certain things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
man, you need to
Sure.
let some things go.
Yeah.
But I love bishops who they're so humble, and they come and they say, teach me, like, just help
Yes.
me understand. I don't know how to do this or how to handle a wife with a ton of betrayal, and
Yeah.
like, what's the best thing that I can do? Like, those type of men,
Yes.
those are the men we need in those callings.
Oh, and I'm right there
Yeah.
with you. My heart is so soft for bishops in general, even the ones that struggle. I feel like they like struggle with the pride and the sort of like taking on the responsibility to be sort of the expert in all things because they hold this mantle and this calling. And
Right.
I feel sorry for them because the system has set them up to fail and has even
Sure.
given them the ego. It's almost like the system has legitimized the deception that they feel in themselves, right? And so I feel
Yes.
bad for those folks. Although I have to say, I have worked with, and I'm sure you probably have too. So in the Midwest, where the church is, sparser than in Utah, I would see strings of people that would come to me from infamous bishops, not because the bishop sent them to me as a referral source. These would be the kind of bishops that would never send somebody to
Yeah.
a therapist.
Yeah.
So it was almost like the people that had gone through some PTSD following the bishop's administration, and I would hear over and over again the stories that were shared and the shaming and you have to call me every night and report on every mistake, like that kind of weird stuff. And then,
Yeah.
and then on the flip side of it, some superstar bishops that I had a great relationship with. I can think of several that are just coming, like, my mind's eye is seeing these various men who are just the absolute most humble, loving
Yes.
people that all they want to do is truly
Just
minister. And I
help.
think, yeah, they
Yeah.
just want to minister, and ministering is oddly enough, Brannon, I was pondering our conversation today earlier this morning, and I was thinking, I bring this up frequently, but whatever, it's okay. I'm the primary chorister at my ward, and I'm not convinced our jobs in many ways are very different in terms of what matters most. I stand before the children and help them feel the infinite love of heavenly parents in Jesus Christ. And I choose songs that direct them to the infinite nature of their lovability. If a bishop really and
Shouldn't that be
truly,
true for every role at church? Right?
amen, brother, like
Yes.
that is
Yeah.
how we create a community that is bound in truly what a spiritual
Yes.
community is supposed to be. Now, whether or not you're a bishop and have a larger stewardship or a primary chorister, but I mean, he's over the youth to do that. I'm over the children. I basically hand my beautiful primary children over to the bishop as they move into the youth and say, thank you, please, bishop, please carry this the way I have set you up, that these children are not necessarily interested in the dogma and the doctrine. They may feel
Right.
it, they may get it. I'm hoping that they get something that is sound and that is actually congruent with the eternal nature of truth and their soul's desire to return to heavenly parents. But beyond that, there's not much that's more important that I hand over to the bishop than, like, you are over the youth program. Love them well.
Right.
Help them feel like they want to be in this community. And that's all primary is for me. I want them to come to church and just be like so excited to get through that darn sacrament meeting so they can get to primary and
Right.
feel excited and loved. And I want
Right.
that to be the youth program too. I want that to be what the bishop does more than anything else.
Yes. And it's that simple,
Yeah.
right? And really, that to me is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like,
Amen.
let's love God and love our neighbor.
Yeah.
And so when our neighbor is struggling, have them experience love from us and support. But the bishop, I think they're told to give counsel. Valerie, I really want to give a horror story, and
Okay.
I want to for a reason.
Okay.
To make a point.
Yeah.
In my world of betrayal, trauma, and sex addiction, I hear about couples going to bishops like right after discovery of affairs and discovery of things. Okay. I'm going to tell this story. This story is actually not a specific story because I've heard it several different times. Couple goes in and he got caught. Either he's consuming pornography a lot and masturbating all the time, or he's cheating on her. And they sit down with the bishop, and the bishop says two things, turns to her very quickly and says, are you starting your forgiveness process?
Oh dear.
So that's one thing that, but before like really understanding the pain and the grief that she's in and everything that's going on, it's time for you to forgive. The second thing that is often said is, maybe you should be more available for him. And so here's the point that I want to make, Valerie, is when you take a woman in that position and her world has just crumbled, just everything about it has shattered, and she goes to look for guidance from God through the bishop, and the message is, you need to give him more sex, or it's time for you to forgive. It leaves her at a loss. There's this dark pit of hopelessness there of, oh my gosh, like that's the answer. That does not feel right. That's the last thing that I want to do. And the reason I bring this up, Valerie, is, we're saying bishops need to be humble and teachable. I think members also need to be aware to not pedestal their bishops too much, and to realize that oftentimes they're wrong, and oftentimes they get it wrong.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, the word I keep using that I think is just, it's so core to what we are trying to do, you and I, in our various ways, Brannon, is we're trying to teach people how to be wise stewards of their own brains. And we're helping them try to cultivate psychological agency, because if it doesn't feel right, we need to dignify that God endowed us with a sense that things don't feel right. And oftentimes we need to listen to that sense and that feeling. But yet what we often do is we allow our programming to trump that inner sense of, nah, it doesn't feel right. And well, he is my authority figure, therefore,
who receives revelation from me.
Yes. So it's almost like we sort of leave our brains in a bucket at the door sometimes.
Exactly.
In the service of obeying or regarding the priesthood authority. And we don't actually think it through. The scenario that you just described, sadly, I know is not a one-time thing, is really a woman who is experiencing, not only has she recently experienced the trauma of the discovery of her husband's situation, but she's now in a secondary traumatic experience, being asked to do that which is not psychologically healthy or whole for herself, or even only for the marriage. And once again, you're sitting in the space with someone who is trying their hardest, doing their best, and completely misinformed.
Yes.
And even
I was just going to say, we call it clergy-induced multidimensional trauma.
Yes.
Because it's like, it's this like just whirlwind of, oh my gosh, I'm at a loss. I don't know what to do now.
Well, and I think what you're describing to me brings up in me sort of, again, when the intersection of faith and psychology goes poorly, which is, well, if we were really to kind of just like if we were able to sort of simplify everything down to like the first principles and ordinances of the gospel, well, okay, what bishop couldn't do that? Well, who could go wrong there? Well, the fact of the matter is they can go wrong, because while repentance and forgiveness is, primary to our faith, there is a time and a place when forgiveness needs to be looked at. And that is a very, very complex and nuanced topic. And what we tend to sometimes,
and it's a process.
It's a huge process, and there's a time for it. But what we tend to do without any sort of training and background in the nature of trauma and the nature of healing is we do something that is oftentimes called spiritual bypassing, which is, I'm not comfortable with how you're feeling. I'm not comfortable with the negative feelings that you're associating with something that is deserving a lot of negative feelings. I don't like you to feel that. So I'm going to go ahead and just throw this little gospel principle at you and tell you need to forgive him, because that's going to make me more comfortable, because I don't know what else to do to help you in your pain.
Yes.
And we do that all of the time.
Yep.
Is we
Which
do this,
invalidates that pain
and it
doesn't
exacerbates it.
love, doesn't connect.
Yes. And what it ends up doing, paradoxically, is that kind of counsel is actually fast tracking that couple to the falling apart of their marriage. Because if that woman is not able to ultimately feel the intensity of the grief and the trauma and the betrayal, then she will never be able to
resentment,
move towards any
disconnection,
exactly.
like all these things are going to start to happen.
And it's because something deep within her is telling her that I have legitimate pain and suffering that needs to be validated and dignified before I can even begin to think about something like forgiveness and restitution and anything that looks like intimacy, sexual or otherwise. But once again, what you and I are talking about, Brannon, it took us years to get to the point to where we could finally like begin to understand this and then help even wrap words around the pain and suffering that people feel. And so again, bishops would never know how to do that.
Right. Okay. Along with that topic, I want to ask you this question.
Sure.
And I want to see if you can understand the question I'm asking here. But what's your opinion on read your scriptures and pray? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I do. You say no more. And the reason why I'm laughing is because on the surface, like that's what we should be, right? I mean, it's a good idea.
Yeah, it's good. It's not; those aren't bad things. We're not ripping on that.
Right. Yeah, and yet what we're riffing on is that tends to be the I'm in panic and I don't know what to tell this suffering person to do about whatever it is they're bringing to me. Therefore, what I'm going to lead with is, brother or sister, if only you would read your scriptures and say your prayers. You can throw and go to the temple, do more family home evening,
go to church, and
right, all of those things. If you will do that, then these are all of the
everything will get better
outcomes, which will like make things better, make things go away, and we can kind of apply that to almost anything people bring into the bishop. If the bishop is trying, if they're not, I mean this respectfully, but if they're out of their lane and they don't know what to do and they're overwhelmed, that is most generally what they're telling us.
What they'll tell you. Yeah.
And so what we're doing in that is, number one, it's extremely invalidating of the actual pain and suffering of the person on the other side of the desk. And it also, once again, it's a paradox, but this is one fast way to fast track somebody into a faith and trust crisis. Because 9 times out of 10, if they're deeply suffering, they've already tried those things.
Yes.
And that hasn't worked. It hasn't been enough. And so what ends up happening is it's like, well, I've done those things and the windows of heaven are closed. I'm not feeling it. Or I've done these things and it's not healing my child. It's not healing my marriage. It's not healing this
God
situation.
has forsaken me.
I have been forsaken because I have this in this case, I have a very simplistic, transactional, faith kind of experience. If I do this, then I do that. Therefore, if I do this and God doesn't hold up his end of the deal.
What does that mean?
Then what that means is I am truly alone.
Yep.
And so what else do you have to add to that?
Well, no, I mean that you just nailed it. And it's, the fact of the matter is from my experience, like I treat sex addiction, but from my experience, reading your scriptures and praying doesn't take away mental illness, and it doesn't resolve deep trauma wounds. It can help. I recommend people to pray all the time. I think it's really therapeutic, but everything that you just said is true. It leads to this, I'm working with a kid who's trying to go out on his mission, and he's supposed to go 6 months without masturbating, and the bishop has prescribed scripture reading and prayer to get him to stop masturbating, and he's masturbating every 3 months. So he's this almost 21-year-old kid. Everybody knows, like, hey, what's wrong with him?
Oh gosh.
He can't get out on his mission. He's reading his scriptures and praying as hard as he possibly can. And by the way, the whole thing with bishops saying, make it 6 months, then you can go. There's big problems there as well.
That's a whole other episode, right?
Yeah. But I just see the shame start to get created there of like, what I am doing what my bishop's telling me to do, yet nothing's getting better.
Yeah.
And it is feelings of forsaken.
Yeah. Well, and it in some ways, it's almost just kind of like there's someone, I have a memory of working with a couple and just them not connecting, like not being able to understand one another. And, his efforts in this case, the male partner, the husband, was really trying. Okay. And the female partner was just wanting to receive, but they were disconnected. And I just will never forget that she said, you know, it's like I'm in the middle of a desert, desperate for water, and you hand me a diamond. She's like, diamonds are great. And in another context, that might be exactly what I want, but I need water.
Give me a glass of water, please.
And yes. I think that's what we're trying to talk about here is in some cases, what the bishops may have to say is incredibly relevant and important in the right context. But in the wrong context, somebody who is dying in the desert might end up actually dying because they are not getting the kind of counsel that they desperately need. You can dump
a bucket of diamonds on them.
That's right.
And they will dehydrate and die.
Exactly. They will die. Okay. So let's just address one more topic before we end up. Okay. Brannon, I'm thinking about how some folks may be wondering about, okay, so how does a bishop address issues with the youth? Right? I mean, as far as like belief and practice and things like that, let's just talk a little about what is their role and responsibility, especially in this changing world where I've actually kind of noticed that if you get them offline, many people actually are really pushing up against some of the same social issues and are not necessarily lining up with some of the party line of the church. But you got a bishop here who's like, I'm holding this calling, so I'm supposed to say this, but I don't really feel this.
I see.
You see what I'm saying?
There's an incongruency there. Yes. Within that bishop even.
Yes.
Saying what they think they should, but not really believing it.
Yes. And they want to keep these kids, though. They know they have influence and they have the capacity to really help youth not feel alone and lonely and ostracized in the church. And I'm actually asking this because it's something that I haven't quite wrapped my own brain around. So let's just spend a second talking about this, this tender area.
Well, my daughter, I'm kind of watching her start this a little bit. Yeah. And my daughter's kind of fearless in many ways. Mm-hmm. And so she's a 14-year-old girl. She just had an interview with the bishop. She just started the seminary. And in the interview with the bishop, I was asking her, how'd it go? The bishop asked her, well, how do you feel about Joseph Smith? And she said, well, I think Joseph Smith and Brigham Young did some pretty bad things. And she said that to the bishop.
Yeah.
And she's like, and I don't understand that. And then in seminary, she kind of brought it up too, like, didn't the history of the church, isn't there some like really interesting stuff there?
Yeah.
And both her seminary teacher and her bishop gave her the same answer. And this was the answer that she's gotten is, a lot of those things happened, but they happened for a reason, but we just don't know why they all happened. And we don't need to worry about that.
So they implemented the shelf strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Put doubt your doubts, put that aside. Yeah. We don't want to go there, especially with you, a vulnerable 14-year-old girl who can be swayed in many different ways. Let's just have you learn how to shelf things. Wow. And just fall back into line with gaining your testimony, right? Yeah. And I think that's really problematic.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yes, I do too. I could go in one of two directions on this. I'll try to hit both briefly. The first thing that I think is so important for us to do as parents and also as we're able to in callings in the church is actually be speakers of truth. We don't need to be we don't need to be belligerent. We don't need to be character attacking, but I think we also need to give our youth the gift of authenticity. In other words, to your daughter, yes, you're absolutely right. Things have happened in our history and have not been addressed. Yes. And as your bishop and as your seminary teacher, we're going to look at those things and we're going to address them and we're going to acknowledge them and we're going to help you internalize for yourself on your own terms
how you want to
navigate that. But there's nothing that evokes a faith and trust crisis more than having a leader, a respected leader, a seminary teacher, a Sunday school teacher, a bishop, basically look us in the face and say what you are legitimately concerned with is not legitimate. I'm illegitimizing your truth.
Please stick your head in the sand. Yes. That's the answer, is to stick that head in the sand, because that's what you need to do.
And that in and of itself is so ethical, that
Yeah.
if a bishop or a seminary teacher has it's such a sacred calling and responsibility. I think these youth are vulnerable in this world, and they're just developmentally going through a lot of angsty stuff. And so I think the most powerful leaders in the church of our youth are the ones that are able to head on address these things in a way that helps the youth see that, like, I get you, I see you. Because you know what? The youth will completely lose respect for those leaders, because they have we already have enough that has been exposed through the internet and whatnot, that what the shelf strategy is ever less effective as the months and years go by. And thank goodness, right? We don't need and want that, because that's why our church is going through such a crisis as it is people are finding these things. They're feeling deceived by their parents, by their leaders, by the church, by the ensign. And now it's like, no. If we want to even have a chance to help these individuals, these youth, we have to say, yeah, some really bad things happened. We have had, as a church, institutionally, a hard time owning up to some pretty serious and significant problems. And we really need to just look at how we make mistakes. Leaders make mistakes, parents make mistakes, you make mistakes, and the church has made mistakes. And we need to do a better job of admitting that. And even if the church, the capital C church, isn't doing it in this ward and in this seminary class, we will.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Which I think there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of repercussion to saying, we'll talk openly and we'll go there.
Yeah.
You know, can that seminary teacher keep his job if he really does that?
And that was actually my point number 2, which is I've gotten to the point to where I think this is a process for all of us, right? Is I am more interested in truth telling than in institutional loyalty. So
Amen.
in other words, if someone is going to be released or lose their calling, the requirement of keeping their calling is that they have to collude in the dishonesty, in the institutional dishonesty, then the calling is not worth it. Because what I'm actually doing is I am activating at least a present or perhaps a future trauma in these adolescents, and I'm not willing to do that with these kids. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So. Any final thoughts as we close up today?
This was fun, Valerie.
I
really appreciate you letting me come on and talk about this. Yeah. And hopefully that, if people are listening, I'm sure there's a lot of different kind of thoughts and feelings that people have when we talk like this, but hopefully that they can just evaluate their experience, both as a leader in the church and their experience with their leaders, and not just do it the old way, the pedestal way.
Yeah, we have to have the courage ourselves to be the change and to open our mouths. If we don't see it, we can't change it. And if we don't speak up, then the church will continue to sort of be governed by the status quo, which hurts people. And we're not, you and I are not interested in that, right?
No way. Nope.
Yeah. You guys, thank you so much for joining me and Brannon here today. I will definitely have you back. I thoroughly enjoy talking to you, Brannon. You're such a pleasure to riff with about these deep topics. So
thank you, Valerie.
You're very
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
Those of you who are enjoying this podcast, who are really feeling seen and heard and known through our conversations, I would invite you to continue to please do the following. Please share this podcast with those in your circles. Also, I really, really, really appreciate so many positive ratings and reviews. And so if you have not already done so, please rate and review this podcast. And once again, those of you who are interested in small group work, I am opening small groups for people that are interested in actually meeting a small community of people like you who are getting a lot of spiritual growth from this podcast. And I moderate those. And let me know if you're interested in joining one of those. You can find me at info@valeriehamaker.com or on Instagram at valeriehamaker. At Instagram at Latter Day Struggles Podcast. Okay, you guys, good to be with you. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.